This section is going to deal with how the media has handled the Gaza wars and the knife attack intifadas that Israel has been subjected to since the early fall of 2015. We say that the media miscoverage is with a vengeance. Joseph's tomb suddenly just catches fire. This is CNN. Joseph's tomb site catches fire in the spate of Palestinian-Israeli violence. This is what they say. Compared to, in contrast, a mosque was torched, radical Israeli settlers blamed, Jewish holy site torched, it catches fire. Look how they covered this. Very obvious. The slant here. Or USA Today, which is not a whole lot better than CNN most of the time. Palestinians torched Joseph's tomb ahead of Rage Day. Correction. Okay, so it wasn't spontaneous, but it still doesn't say who did it. CNN. Joseph's tomb site set ablaze amid wave of Palestinian-Israeli violence. It could have been set ablaze by Jews, but that's not what the story is about whatsoever. Joseph's tomb catching fire wasn't the only inanimate object doing things on its own. Rocks, all by themselves, seem to have pelted a Jew driving a car in Jerusalem. Because the New York Times says, Jewish man dies as rocks pelt his car in East Jerusalem. Of course, East Jerusalem doesn't exist. There's no such city as East Jerusalem. It's really an eastern neighborhood of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a united city. It was only divided by Jordan from 1948 to 1967 when Israel liberated it. And then when Israel liberated East Jerusalem, of course, I know I'm diverting here. Jerusalem, of course, I know I'm diverting over here. That is when Israel allowed all citizens of all religions equal access to all holy sites. Jews were banned by Jordan and access to the Temple Mount. Getting back here, what's next? Quote, Jewish man dies as knife cuts his throat. The mainstream media, of course, focuses on Israel killing Palestinians, but never mind, they are terrorists. It almost seems like Palestinians, civilians, for no reason whatsoever. Jerusalem Post said, and according to LA Times, 6 Palestinian teens die amid Mideast unrest. But each of those killed was a terrorist in the midst of an attack. They don't tell you the full context here. They don't want to. It doesn't fit their narrative. BBC, who is horrendously, consistently biased against Israel and the Jewish people. Palestinians shot dead after Jerusalem attack kills 2. But he's the attacker, the Palestinian. That's the story. Indiscriminately, he attacked this Palestinian. 4 more Palestinians shot dead on the streets. The headline focuses on Israel killing Palestinians. Of course, most people don't read beyond the headlines. You have to understand, buried in the story, you might get a kernel of the truth. Here's another example, LA Times. 4 Palestinian teens are killed in Israeli violence. Now, Canberra got them to correct it got the correction to violence from Israeli violence. Here's the truth. Palestinian incitement is the source of the Palestinian terror. Look at this. Look at this showing on a Quds news network, Arabic news network. Look what they're showing here. Look how graphic this is. This knife, bloody knife in the hand of this person, showing you how to stab too. The New York Post put it out there. Very few other newspapers would. The terrorists even tell you how to stab a Jew with a video. They posted it here. What does this tell you about their culture? About their hatred? About the incitement? We can go on and on here. NPR, CNN. It got no better with the coverage of the 3rd Gaza war, the last one, in the summer of 2014, in response to the hundreds and thousands of rockets and terror tunnels from Gaza. Now, here's what really happened. Israel puts out information, the IDF, as to look at how many numbers of rockets fired specifically. 3,360 rockets fired from Gaza. 2,300 of them hit Israel. 475 actually hit Gaza, didn't even make it there. I mean, look at with precision here. 584 rockets intercepted by Iron Dome. 32 offensive terrorist tunnels were destroyed. 4,762 terror attacks targets struck. More than 750 terrorists killed. I think actually the number is close to 1,000. Now, Israel's accused of bad PR most of the time. And part of that charge might be true. But the fact of the matter is it does put this information out there. The media deliberately averts its eyes to Israel's truth and the telling of the truth from Israel's side. No matter what Israel says, they are going to distort it so it fits the narrative of the poor, defenseless Palestinian Arabs versus the Goliath of Israel. All right, look at this. This is what really happened. But you wouldn't know that from the various headlines. Gaza explodes, as if it exploded all by itself. Führer unites Palestinians, Israeli Arabs. Israel has pummeled Gaza, Hamas. I like these cartoons here. Look at the one on the left. Hamas attacks Israel with rockets. The first three boxes show, and the last one says, Israel defend itself. And of course the news says, Israel attacked Gaza today, without reporting that Hamas attacked Israel. How about the naive newsman from Dry Bones? Are you ready to go on the air? Ready. The casualty footage will be from Gaza will be behind you. Okay. And this time, don't say, quote, dead civilians courtesy of Hamas Human Shield Department. Okay, gotcha. It's kind of what happens. Bibi said, we use missiles to protect our people. They, Hamas, use their people to protect their missiles. That's so true. They protected their missiles inside of mosques, schools, and hospitals, and the tunnels. Congressman Ed Royce, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, said, Israel uses Iron Dome to protect its people. Hamas asks its people to be human shields to protect rockets and rocket launchers. That's not reported in the news. Almost all these photos here were of damage in Gaza. Okay? In Gaza. That's what they're talking about. They don't care about the damage to Israel or Israeli civilians. Here's 1 week in July of 2014 coverage. Photos of damage in Gaza were 8. Photos in Israel were 3, and 2 were of tanks and 1 of a soldier. Not especially balanced coverage, is it? Remember, who started this war? Hamas started this war in Gaza for no reason other than they started it. Israel did not start this war. Israel did not want this war, did not need this war. But after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rockets were fired into Israel, Hamas's goal was to take prisoners, to take hostages, to take soldiers, and to cause as much mayhem and damage as they could, firing indiscriminately. Again, we can go on and on here. Israel's airport was being shone, smoke and fire over Gaza City. Here's another example of the Philadelphia Inquirer misportraying the Washington Post article on Tel Aviv civilians showing bravado as, quote, missile shield maintains the calm. Look at this. Thanks to Iron Dome, Tel Aviv is a world apart. As if Israel should be blamed for developing such a high-tech, effective missile defense system against the thousands of rockets that are being shot by Hamas at it to defend themselves. Basically, they're saying Israel has no right to defend itself and its citizens, and comparing the poor citizens of Gaza, who don't have this kind of system to defend them, except they're being made to be human shields. This is, again, a jab at Israel. But the reality is that Israelis had only seconds to get to bomb shelters, if you even could. You know, look at these. These are bomb shelters that Israel built to defend civilians from rocket attacks, Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Hamas doesn't develop these kind of tunnels for those purposes. No, they're built to attack as offensive tunnels to attack Israel and Israeli civilians and to protect its missiles. But not everyone could get to even a bomb shelter. Some were lucky to take refuge by a car, or even this lady on the bottom, by shrubs. They had seconds to hear a siren. You know, compare the headlines and photos in these two Inquirer news stories during the July 2014 Gaza war. Tens of thousands flee homes in Gaza. Palestinians in Gaza City drive by buildings destroyed by an Israeli strike. Israel was very surgical in its strikes. It was not going after the Gazan people. And in fact, what I haven't discussed yet is the fact that Israel takes great care. The IDF is the most moral army in the world. Takes great care with the civilians to avoid and minimize civilian casualties. How does it do this? It sent thousands of leaflets by air to Gazans to warn that they were going to imminently attack certain areas surgically. They sent text messages to these people. Now, who does that? What other army in the world does that to enemy combatants who are sending thousands of rockets their way to hit them and destroy them? I don't think the United States would be doing that if these came from Mexico or God forbid, any other place locally. And here's another article. Tens of thousands of Israelis flee southern Israel, but the ambiguous Inquirer headline, Israelis leaving Gaza border. They just decided to go on vacation? Accompanied by a photo, firefighters inspect the rubble of a 3-story residential building after an Israeli strike in the northern Gaza Strip. It doesn't say the context of why. Now, the so-called vast majority of Gazans killed were civilians, okay? And that's something else that the media continues to misreport. They say more than 2,100 Palestinians were killed. The vast majority of civilians. That's not true. Almost half of them were ultimately identified, as militants, Gazan militants, Hamas terrorists. And the AP has enormous power and influence in the world, in the media world. As long as they keep shooting this stuff out, they're doing great damage, according to a Forbes contributor, Richard Behar. They should not be saying in their stories that the vast majority of casualties are civilians. They could at least mention that there are other sources reaching different conclusions. Why is the media taking at its word the Palestinian Arabs, who've been shown to have an agenda and are shown to be lying? As British Colonel Richard Kemp has pointed out, during the operation there was approximately 1 civilian casualty for every terrorist killed by the IDF, whereas the average in the world is 4 civilians for every combatant. And that when taking into consideration Hamas's use of human shields, this shows how careful the IDF is. Again, this slide shows and epitomizes the case for moral clarity. Coming from Professor Alan Dershowitz's book, you have the soldier of Palestine on the left, shielded behind the baby carriage, facing off against the IDF soldier who's protecting the innocent and vulnerable. This is an example of a double war crime by Palestinian Arabs and Hamas. The New York Times sometimes is out of control to such a large extent that it's incomprehensible. But in their world, of course, the New York Times buried the Holocaust in the back pages of the papers for many years in the 1930s and 40s. This is something that came out on December 31st, 2014. It chooses a Gaza child to symbolize all child deaths in war during the year 2014. And look how big that number is, 2,500. And you have Afghanistan with asterisk, Central African Republic, Gaza, Iraq, Pakistan, South Sudan, Syria, and Ukraine. Yet, the next day, the New York Times states more than 76,000 people died in Syria's civil war in 2014, including more than 3,500 children, a monitoring group reported. Why isn't that number at least up there? They put number unknown, but they kind of knew that. How about The Guardian stated that 50 to 100,000 civilians were killed in South Sudan during the year 2014. You could estimate that there had to be a whole lot of children who died, a lot more than 2,500. The Iraq body count, 16,000 Iraqi civilians killed in 2014 and only 416 children. Who's giving that? This is incredible, it's destructive, it's misleading, and it's wrong. And it shows the bias of the narrative that the New York Times wants to portray. This is how the media covers Israel, how it looks to us, it should look to us. News in the Middle East. If Muslims are getting killed, question is Israel involved? But the answer is yes. Well, how many casualties are there? If it's under 1,000, the cry is to stop the war crimes. But if it's over 1,000, oh my God, we must stop the genocide. But if Israel's not involved, and Israel's not involved in the vast majority of Muslim-on-Muslim violence, How many casualties? Was it under 100,000? Who cares? Shouldn't even be on the news. We have such a low bar for the Muslims anyway. Shia and Sunni have been fighting each other since the advent of Islam, since Muhammad died since the 7th century. Or if over 100,000, oh well, that's just too bad. We kind of expect that, don't we? And here's how the United States, its so-called honest brokerage, should look to us. With John Kerry, Secretary of State, trying to mediate between Hamas, the terrorist who's got his list of demands there, death to all Jews, holding a child with a suicide vest on, and Bibi, and he's saying, could you at least meet him halfway? Is that a fair negotiation? You don't negotiate with evil.